Welcome back. So we've got input working, which is great, but we've structured this so that we can have multiple input mapping contexts. We only have one, but we're going to have another one specifically for handling our gameplay abilities. And I'd like you to get some practice doing this on your own, so this is a challenge for you. Create a new input mapping context asset in the editor and call it IMC abilities. And I'd like you to use this for your ability input actions. So add it to the array of input mapping contexts in the player controller blueprint. And then create an input action, call it IA primary, and this will be for our primary ability. You can leave it at digital bool, that's the default setting. And add a mapping for the left mouse button in the input mapping context. And then add a variable to the player controller for this input action. You can call it primary action. And create a callback function. You can call it primary. And bind that callback to the input action in setup input component. And log a message so we can test it and make sure everything works. And by the end of it, I expect for your left mouse button to trigger a log message. So make sure everything's set up correctly and test it out. Pause the video here and conquer this challenge now. Okay, so we need a new input mapping context. I'm going to browse to where I have IMC movement, and we're going to create a new one. So I'm going to go to input mapping context. I'm going to call this IMC abilities, and we'll have a new input action. I have all my movement input actions in movement actions, so I'm going to have another folder, and I'm going to call it ability actions. You can structure these how you like, but I like to have a lot of structure here. And for now, we're just going to have one new input action. So I'm going to have input action IA primary. And I don't need to change any of its settings. It's digital bool by default. We could see value type Boolean here when we hover over it. That's perfect. And I just want to add that to IMC abilities here by adding a new mapping, choosing IA primary. And I can click on the keyboard icon and then left click on it again, and I have my left mouse button bound to it. And that's all I have to do here in IMC abilities. So I'm going to close that out and go back to my player controller, and I need to add that input mapping context to my array. So I'm going to add a new element to the array and choose IMC abilities. Now that's not the only thing we have to do. We need to add a new variable to our player controller C++ class for the primary input action. And we can even separate these into categories if we like. So let's close the editor. We'll go ahead and save all. And back in the player controller.h, we can start adding our new input actions. We just want one more, right? It's going to be the primary action. So I'm going to call it primary action. And we can have subcategories here. We can have crash input pipe movement. And we'll make all three of our movement input actions have that subcategory. And then we'll have abilities. And that's actually the look action. I don't want that there. I want look action to be in movement as well. So the three movement actions are in movement. Primary action is in abilities. And now that we have this, we need a callback for it. I don't need any input parameters on my callback. So it's going to be void primary with no inputs. We'll go ahead and generate its definition. And before implementing it, I'm going to bind it in setup input component here. Now I want to use started here. So I'm going to actually copy the binding of jump action and change this to use primary action. And we'll use started for the trigger event, and the callback will be primary. So now we have that bound. The last thing to do is test it out, and we can use a UE log for this. I'm just going to use log temp warning primary. That's going to be just fine. We're going to remove this as soon as we've implemented real functionality for it, but this will prove that it works. Now, if you have debug symbols downloaded, you can run in debug mode. I typically like to do that once I start testing things. So I like to change my configuration to debug game editor for the target, and I just hit the little bug icon, and we can run this in debug mode. And that way, if we hit any exceptions, we'll see which line they're triggered on. And we can also place breakpoints and such. So for now, we have our input action. We need to set primary action in the blueprint for the player controller. Let's test it out. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and click yes down here at the bottom right so that I can open my previously opened assets. I don't need the game mode though. I just need the player controller, and I don't really need to open the full blueprint editor. All I have to do is search for crash here. And under movement, I can see that I've got my input mapping contexts. I can expand that to make sure that I have both of them. IMC abilities is there. And then under abilities, we have primary action where I can assign IA primary. Now, I think I don't really want input mapping context under movement. So just a minor change, I'm going to go to input mapping context and just put it into crash pipe input here. Next time we compile, that change will take effect. But for now, I want to test these new features. So I'm going to go ahead and dock the output log and clear the log and press play and left click. And I see that I get my primary triggered just the way I wanted it to. So that's working. Everything looks good. I can go ahead and save all. Done with the output log for now. Input is set up. Congratulations. And just to display that little category change, I'm just going to recompile real quick. So closing the editor, launching from my IDE again, opening up my player controller, searching for crash, and now I have movement and abilities and input mapping context separated, which is what I wanted. All right, things are organized, looking good. Excellent job, and I'll see you in the next video.